March 1945, General Maurice Rose leads the charge into Nazi Germany. Victory is within reach until a German ambush changes everything. In an instant, bullets fly, and the battlefield descends into chaos. But retreat is not an option. The final battle for Hitler's last stronghold has begun. Imagine American soldiers dodging the deadly roar of Panther tanks. From France's shores, they've clawed their way into Nazi Germany, nearing the last industrial bastion propping up Hitler's empire. Just miles from a strike to end it all, can they make it? General Maurice Rose, the bold heart of this charge, suddenly faces a German tank trap. Stepping from his jeep, he's cut down in a flash. His stunned men scatter into the woods as bullets fly. Their march falters but retreat. Never. Too much blood's been spilled. They surge forward, guns blazing, tearing into the enemy. Sherman tanks smash through defenses as artillery carves a path for infantry to hit hard. Hitler's last stronghold teeters on the edge. How did they turn chaos into triumph? Stick with us, the fall of the Führer's fortress is just ahead. By 1940, Europe trembled beneath Adolf Hitler's Wehrmacht. 7 nations fell in rapid succession, their armies shattered by the Blitzkrieg. But by 1945, the myth of Nazi invincibility had faded into history. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, the German supreme commander in the West, lamented the crumbling state of his forces, likening his command to playing a Beethoven sonata on an old, rickety, out-of-tune piano. For 3 years, a new force had risen against the Reich, one of the few Hitler had challenged with a formal declaration of war: the United States of America. When American recruits first set foot in Europe, war was an unforgiving teacher. 2/3 had never even held a rifle. But with time, they hardened into battle-tested warriors, storming the beaches of Normandy and pushing deep into Hitler's fortress. Now, their eyes were locked on Berlin. The once mighty Wehrmacht was crumbling, but the road ahead remained treacherous. The Americans knew one truth: the Führer would never surrender without a fight. On March 7, 1945, thousands of American boots roared over the Rhine River's edge. Ten's eyes traced the Ludendorff Bridge's battered pillars would it hold. The Germans had tried blasting it apart, a frantic bid to halt the Allied tide. Smoke swirled, debris fell, yet the bridge stood firm. General Omar Bradley, atop the 12th Army Group, gaped in awe. To his officers he grinned. This will bust him wide open. He barked orders. Troops and tanks raced across before fate could intervene. Luck alone wouldn't win this war, though. Berlin loomed 300 miles off, with the Ruhr, Germany's industrial core, barring the way. Army Group B, led by Field Marshal Walter Model, guarded it fiercely. Dubbed the Führer's firemen for taming hopeless fights, Model's 400,000 troops dug in, primed to drown any advance in blood. Hitler's empire waned, but their steel held firm. Storming the Ruhr head-on? Suicide for WWII. Enter Dwight D. Eisenhower, Allied mastermind with a sharper plan, a bold pincer move to choke the Germans out. Success could smash Nazi defiance in the West, clearing the path to Berlin. General Courtney Hodges's First Army would drive east, 90 miles north. William H. Simpson's Ninth Army would pounce. If it worked, they'd trap Model's forces in the Ruhr pocket. But here's the catch: no radio chatter between them. How would they dodge a German ambush? Keep watching, this gambit's about to unfold. After 10 days of relentless strain, the Ludendorff Bridge finally collapsed into the Rhine on March 17th. It had served its purpose, allowing thousands of American troops to flood into enemy territory. But the bridgehead alone was not enough for the grand offensive ahead. The Allies needed a larger, more decisive crossing. Enter Operation Plunder, a multi-pronged assault designed to force the Rhine and open the final path to victory. Led by General William H. Simpson and Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, the operation commenced on the night of March 23rd in a storm of fire and steel. Over 5,000 Allied guns roared in unison, unleashing a devastating barrage that shattered German defenses along the eastern bank. On the ground, Hobart's Funnies, a collection of highly specialized armored vehicles, rolled into action. Churchill tanks, modified for maximum destruction, tore through enemy fortifications. Flame-spewing crocodiles with their 120-yard jets of fire turned Nazi bunkers into infernos. Avraris, launching their massive flying dustbins, obliterated reinforced positions in fiery bursts. German soldiers, battle-hardened across Europe, had never witnessed destruction like this on their own soil. Meanwhile, American engineers worked under heavy bombardment, racing against time to construct pontoon bridges. Shells rained down as they labored, forging a vital pathway for troops and supplies to push across the Rhine. The next day, reinforcements descended from above. In the largest single-day airborne operation of the war, more than 16,000 paratroopers from the U.S. 17th Airborne Division and British 6th Airborne Division filled the sky, their parachutes blotting out the sun as they landed behind German lines. The overwhelming Allied assault shattered enemy resistance. Entire German units, cut off and outgunned, fled north in chaos. By March 27th, the Allies had advanced 35 miles into German territory, securing vital ground. But while Simpson's 9th Army had broken through, the final success still depended on General Courtney Hodges' 1st Army moving up from the south. In the small town of Remagen, just 35 miles from Cologne, General Courtney Hodges prepared for the final push. Leading 3 heavy corps, Hodges faced a well-fortified German stronghold. There was no time for hesitation. He ordered his forces to unleash everything they had. The town shook as a relentless barrage erupted. The Germans fought back fiercely, but their counterfire was no match for the overwhelming might of the American assault. With clear skies above, Allied aircraft descended like hawks, sealing the enemy's fate. By noon, the battle for the Remagen bridgehead was over. Hodges' forces didn't just hold the bridgehead, they shattered through it. On the first day alone, they surged 12 miles, by the second, 20. The pace was so intense that infantry had to ride atop Sherman tanks just to keep up. The German lines crumbled under pressure. Entire units surrendered in droves by March 26th. A single corps had captured 17,000 Nazi soldiers. In just 4 days, Hodges' 1st Army advanced 80 miles, seizing strategic towns like Giessen and Marburg. But the mission wasn't over yet. To complete the encirclement of Army Group B, Hodges' forces had to pivot north and link up with Simpson's 9th Army, cutting off the remaining German troops. The responsibility for this bold thrust fell to General Maurice Rose of the 3rd Armored Division. He turned to Lieutenant Colonel Walter B. Richardson with a single order: just go like hell. Task Force Richardson surged forward, tearing through German roadblocks and shattering enemy defenses. They covered 45 miles in a single day. The advance seemed unstoppable. Then, just south of Paderborn, they slammed into a heavily armed SS battalion, reinforced by Tiger and Panther tanks. A brutal 2-day battle ensued. Artillery thundered, tanks clashed at close range, and every inch of ground was a blood-soaked fight. Amid the chaos, a Tiger tank intercepted General Rose's vehicle. His column was ambushed, forced to surrender, but the Nazis weren't taking prisoners. Rose was executed on the spot, his staff scattering in the aftermath. Yet, even in the face of loss, the Americans pressed on. Task Force Richardson bypassed the last SS defenses at Paderborn, pushing west toward Lippstadt. By then, German forces had collapsed. Outmaneuvered and outgunned, they could do nothing as the 1st Army completed its pivot, linking up with the 9th Army and sealing the fate of Army Group B. On Easter Sunday, the Allied pincers snapped shut around Field Marshal Walter Model's forces, trapping over 370,000 German troops inside the Ruhr Pocket, including 14 divisions of Army Group B, 2 corps from the 1st Parachute Army, and millions of civilians. Any hope for a counterstrike was crushed almost immediately. The Germans were running on empty. Less than a quarter of their troops had working weapons, and fuel and ammunition were nearly gone. Desperate, Model pleaded for air support, but Hitler refused, unwilling to divert aircraft from other fronts under relentless Allied air superiority. When Model proposed a withdrawal or breakout, Hitler dismissed it outright, insisting that Fortress Ruhr could hold the Allies back for months. The Allies wasted no time tightening their grip. Artillery and relentless airstrikes pounded German positions as U.S. forces advanced 6 miles per day, capturing towns and dismantling resistance one piece at a time. The crushing inevitability of defeat spread fear among the Germans. During an Easter Mass, parishioners reportedly heard the distant thunder of gunfire drawing closer. A woman turned to the priest and whispered, "Herr Vicar, they are here." Moments later, the church doors burst open not from enemy fire, but from the barrel of an American Sherman tank. The soldiers, sensing the fear in the room, knelt beside the congregation, joining them in prayer. By April 14th, the U.S. 1st and 9th Armies had cut the Ruhr pocket in half at Hattingen, forcing the surrender of the eastern section. The next day, Model faced reality. Fortress Ruhr had collapsed, and his army was finished. In his final orders, he instructed non-combatant troops and older soldiers to surrender or return home. But Model himself refused to surrender. Even as the western portion of the pocket fell on April 18th, he still clung to a final, desperate option: escape. As 24 Nazi generals surrendered, Field Marshal Walter Model fled, refusing to be captured by advancing American forces. Like his Führer, he clung to delusions of defiance, telling his chief of staff as the Ruhr pocket collapsed, "What is left for a defeated general? A field marshal does not become a prisoner. Such a thing is just not possible." Meanwhile, the Third Reich faced certain annihilation. The dream of a 1,000-year empire was unraveling in mere days. On April 21st, after hearing a Berlin broadcast condemning his failure and stripping him of redemption, Model accepted his fate. His command was gone. His honor was gone. The war was lost. In a final act, the man once known as the Führer's fireman chose to extinguish himself. Consumed by the very flames of war, he could no longer control. For the Americans, the battle for the Ruhr came at a heavy cost: 10,000 casualties, but it delivered one of the most decisive victories of the war. In dismantling one of Nazi Germany's last strongholds, they shattered its ability to fight. War is full of moments that changed history in an instant. Subscribe to FLYTOP for more real war history. Next time, we'll take you to another battle where every second counted. In March 1945, with the Danish resistance on the verge of collapse, British Mosquito bombers prepared for a daring mission to strike the Gestapo's headquarters right in the heart of Copenhagen. Known as the Shell House, the building held files that could dismantle the resistance and expose its final members. However, in addition to these critical documents, the upper floors imprisoned helpless Danish captives. To destroy the headquarters without killing the prisoners, only a precision low-level bombing raid could succeed. For this, the Royal Air Force turned to Squadron Leader Ted Sizemore, their premier low-level navigator, to lead the mission. Flying just above the town center at 250 miles per hour, the Mosquito bombers closed in on their target. In addition to their 550-pound payloads, the pilots carried the weight of a nearly impossible mission. As the war in Europe entered its final months, the Modstandsbevægelsen, or Danish resistance, faced imminent destruction. The Gestapo's relentless crackdown had left the movement struggling to survive, its members hunted, and its networks exposed. By the spring of 1944, the Geheime Staatspolizei, the German secret police, had seized control of the Shell House, a 6-story office building located just 1,600 feet west of Copenhagen's town hall. Under its new function, the Shell House became the central command for Gestapo operations in Denmark. SS Sturmbannführer Karl-Heinz Hoffmann spearheaded the ruthless effort to dismantle the resistance, orchestrating interrogations, raids, and arrests. Inside the Shell House, makeshift prison cells confined Danish citizens suspected of aiding the resistance. Within these walls, captives endured brutal interrogations, their fate uncertain. More critically, the Gestapo meticulously maintained files detailing the underground movement's members, staff houses, and operations documents that, if left intact, could crush the resistance entirely. By late 1944, the movement teetered on the brink of collapse. Desperate, its leaders turned to British operatives, pleading for a Royal Air Force bombing raid to obliterate the Shell House and its damning records. However, this request came with a grave complication. The prison cells were located on the upper floors, meaning any high-altitude attack would likely kill the very people the mission sought to protect. A low-level strike was the only viable option, but executing such a raid in the center of a bustling city carried enormous risk. At first, the RAF hesitated. Striking only the middle and lower floors without endangering civilians or prisoners seemed nearly impossible. Yet, As the Gestapo's grip tightened and the urgency intensified, hesitation gave way to action. Accepting the challenge, the RAF committed to the mission, setting in motion a daring operation, Operation Carthage. During World War II, aerial bombing was often synonymous with widespread destruction rather than surgical precision. Early efforts at targeted strikes in Europe faced immense challenges: outdated technology, insufficient training, and the unpredictable nature of wartime weather. And as a result, both the Royal Air Force and the United States Army Air Forces relied heavily on high-altitude bombing. Their approach targeted large industrial zones rather than precise enemy installations. While effective, these massive raids devastated vast sections of German cities, often causing extensive collateral damage. One unit, however, defied these limitations. RAF No. 140 Wing, part of the 2nd Tactical Air Force. This elite unit, composed of 3 squadrons, had perfected the art of low-level precision bombing. Flying the de Havilland Mosquito, a light bomber prized for its speed and maneuverability, No. 140 Wing executed daring low-altitude strikes with unmatched accuracy. Their expertise led to a series of high-risk operations, later dubbed Mosquito Daylight Spectaculars. At the core of their success was Air Commodore Edward Ted Sismore, the RAF's leading low-level navigator. Fearless and precise, Sismore had already led some of the most audacious daylight raids in history. On January 31, 1943, alongside Reginald Reynolds, he spearheaded the RAF's first ever daylight bombing of Berlin. Striking their target at exactly 11 a.m., their bombs detonated on schedule, interrupting Hermann Göring mid-speech in a stunning demonstration of precision. With such experience under his belt, Sismore and No. 140 Wing were the only ones capable of executing Operation Carthage, a mat would demand nothing short of perfection. With an elite squadron at their disposal, the RAF still needed a level of precision comparable to modern laser-guided weapons to ensure success in Operation Carthage. The most critical challenge was identifying a single building within a densely packed urban landscape. To overcome this, RAF planners combined aerial reconnaissance photography with intelligence from the Danish resistance, constructing a highly detailed relief model of the shell house and its surroundings. More than just a map, this model allowed pilots to immerse themselves in the attack plan, studying the structure from the exact low-altitude perspective they would experience during the raid. Precision was paramount. The Mosquito bombers were to fly at rooftop level, releasing their payloads on a flat trajectory to skip the bombs directly into the lower floors of the shell house. This technique would ensure that the Gestapo's records were obliterated, while leaving the upper floors intact to maximize the prisoners' survival chances. The RAF scheduled the attack for late morning, a window where 2 Gestapo shifts would overlap, ensuring maximum impact. However, delays plagued the operation. In December 1944, the raid was postponed due to the Battle of the Ardennes, a German counteroffensive in Belgium and Luxembourg. Then, in January 1945, unrelenting bad weather forced another delay. But, by March 1945, with the Gestapo's grip tightening more than ever, Danish resistance leaders sent an urgent plea to London. An attack had to happen immediately, at any cost. On March 21, 1945, at 8:55 a.m., 20 Mosquito bombers of No. 140 Wing took off from RAF First Field in Norfolk. Most carried 500-pound explosives, while 2 aircraft belonged to the RAF Film Production Unit, assigned to document the raid in real time. Accompanying them were 30 Mustangs from the 11th Fighter Group, assigned to suppress anti-aircraft defenses and secure air superiority over Copenhagen. However, shortly after takeoff, 3 Mustangs aborted the mission, returning to base due to technical failures or collisions with a flock of seagulls. The rest of the squadron pressed forward, flying over the North Sea before reaching Tiso Lake in Western Zealand. There, the bombers split into 3 attack waves. The plan was simple, but required absolute precision. Approach from the south, follow the coastline, and use predetermined visual landmarks to guide the final attack run toward the shell house. The first wave of 6 Mosquitoes, led by squadron leader Ted Sismore and commanded by Group Captain Robert Bateson, sped toward downtown Copenhagen, skimming just above the rooftops. The roar of their Merlin engines reverberated across the city as they approached the target zone. Then disaster struck. As the bombers passed Enghoff Station, Wing Commander Peter A. Klebeau miscalculated his altitude and clipped a lamppost. The collision sent his Mosquito spiraling off course, its wingtip striking a nearby building. The sudden impact dislodged both of its 500-pound bombs, which detonated upon impact with the ground. The out-of-control aircraft then crashed into a garage near a school, killing both crew members instantly. Despite this tragedy, the remaining bombers pressed forward, relying on Sismore's navigation to guide them to the shell house. As the building came into view, the pilots released their payloads in perfect unison. 6 bombs tore into the western wing of the Gestapo headquarters, sending shards of concrete and steel flying into the streets. Inside, shockwaves shattered windows, collapsed walls, and within moments, flames erupted, turning the building into an inferno. Winds fanned the blaze, engulfing the Gestapo's meticulously kept records, reducing years of intelligence to ash. The first wave had done the impossible. The shell house Gestapo's stronghold in Denmark was now in ruins. But the mission was not over yet. It was time for the final waves to finish the job. The second wave approached a city already in chaos. Disoriented by the haze, some pilots mistook the crash site for the target. Wing Commander Robert Wilson Iredale realized the mistake just in time. He redirected his aircraft, successfully hitting the shell house. However, the other Mosquitoes in his wave failed to adjust course, dropping their bombs on the wrong site, adding to the unintended destruction. The third wave, led by Wing Commander F.M. Denton, faced similar confusion. Thick smoke obscured their vision, leading them to misidentify the school as the target. 6 Mosquitoes dropped their payloads prematurely, furthering the collateral damage. The final aircraft, piloted by Flight Lieutenant Bob Kirkpatrick, had a different role, carrying incendiary bombs. His mission was to create a diversion beyond the shell house. Flying low, he steadied his Mosquito and dropped his incendiaries several blocks away, igniting fires that distracted enemy forces. Although his bombs landed half a mile from the target, the ruse worked. The Germans focused on the diversion, allowing the bombers to retreat. As the Mosquitoes withdrew, they faced heavy losses. One crashed into the waters near Haven, its crew lost. Even the Mustangs suffered casualties. One was shot down by flak from the German cruiser Nuremberg, while another pilot was captured after crash landing near Copenhagen. Despite the setbacks, the shell house was ablaze, its records destroyed. In the chaos, over a dozen prisoners escaped, seizing their chance for freedom. The day after the raid, a No. 34 wing reconnaissance aircraft flew over downtown Copenhagen, capturing images of the devastation. The photographs confirmed the mission's overwhelming impact. The shell house had been struck by 8 500-pound bombs, 6 in the western wing, 2 in the eastern wing, leaving it nearly level to the ground. According to the official damage report, the top story and roof of the south front were destroyed, and the remainder was partially gutted and destroyed. 11:39. The west wing was destroyed nearly to ground level and the east wing. The top story and roof were destroyed and the floor below damaged. The mission was most successful. Despite the destruction, the mission's greatest success lay in the survival of many prisoners. Thanks to precise targeting, the upper floors where most detainees were held remained largely intact. Amid the chaos, 18 of the 26 prisoners escaped, seizing their chance at freedom. Meanwhile, Gestapo casualties were severe. -55 personnel, including officers and staff, were confirmed killed in the attack. In the aftermath, the Copenhagen resistance sent a message of gratitude to the Royal Air Force. With the Gestapo's records reduced to ash, the immediate threat to the resistance movement was neutralized, allowing them to continue the fight. Against immense odds, the RAF had achieved the impossible. The success of Operation Carthage came at a devastating cost. Yet, the greatest tragedy was not among the RAF crews. At Jeanne d'Arc School, more than 100 civilians perished, including teachers, nuns, bystanders, and, most heartbreakingly, children. The pilots of Operation Carthage were unaware of the full human toll of their mission until after the war ended. Returning home, they mourned their fallen comrades while taking some solace in knowing that their actions had crippled an oppressive regime. Years later, Ted Sismore reflected on the mission with a haunting realization. If every bomb had struck the shell house as intended, few if any prisoners would have survived. The accuracy of the first wave, which had been so crucial to the mission's success, had also been incredibly lethal. He admitted, the loss of the children affected us very much. Today, a bronze-cast propeller from one of the downed Mosquito bombers is mounted on the wall of the shell house, a solemn tribute to the airmen who never returned. Beneath it, a plaque bears the names of the 9 RAF crew members who gave their lives in Operation Carthage. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to FLYTOP for more incredible wartime missions and hidden history. What other daring operations shaped the world? Stay with us to discover more. A battered F-9F Panther thundered through the icy November sky over Korea, its engine groaning under the strain of severe damage. Lieutenant Royce Williams gripped the controls with steady hands, forcing the aircraft forward at full throttle. Ahead, the USS Oriskany pitched and rolled with the restless sea, a moving sanctuary he had to reach. Below, the escorting destroyer, unaware of his crippled state, reacted to the fast-approaching aircraft. Gun crews sprang into action. Tracer rounds ripped through the air, streaking dangerously close before the crew recognized the limping Panther as one of their own. Williams fought against the winds tearing at his aircraft, but the damage was relentless. His controls grew sluggish, barely responding to his desperate adjustments. With the carrier now on high alert, Williams' radio crackled as he reported his predicament. His approach was off by 15 degrees, and his speed was an alarming 200 miles per hour, nearly double the safe landing velocity. On the Oriskany's bridge, the captain gave an urgent command, adjusting course to better align with Williams' erratic descent. But with the ship rolling beneath him and his aircraft barely holding together, the next few moments would determine everything. Either he would execute a near impossible landing or disappear into the frigid abyss below. USS Oriskany, an Essex-class aircraft carrier, had patrolled the waters off Korea since October 1952, its Air Group 102 launching relentless strikes against enemy targets. Among the key locations was Chongjin, a critical logistics hub channeling supplies from the People's Republic of China and Soviet Vladivostok to North Korean forces. Pilots from Air Group 102 prowled the skies, strafing convoys, destroying trains, and bombing bridges to sever supply lines. Among them was Lieutenant Royce Williams. A native of South Dakota, Williams had left behind his Minnesota National Guard corporal stripes to earn his Navy wings in 1945. Now, flying with Fighter Squadron 781 as part of Air Group 102, he piloted the F-9F-5 Panther, a formidable jet fighter equipped with 4 20mm cannons, designed for both air-to-air dogfights and ground strikes. Though cutting edge for its time, the Panther was outclassed in speed and agility by newer enemy aircraft. On November 18, 1952, USS Oriskany steamed through the freezing waters off North Korea's northeast coast, just 50 miles east of Chongjin, and less than 100 miles from Soviet military bases in Vladivostok. The weather was brutal. Heavy snow blanketed the carrier and the rest of Task Force 77, with air temperatures in the low 20s Fahrenheit and near freezing waters. Any crew member who went overboard would succumb to hypothermia within minutes. Despite the conditions, operations continued as usual until a top-secret transmission shattered the routine. Fighter jets had been detected flying south from Vladivostok, heading directly for Task Force 77. Tensions aboard the fleet had already been high. A recent strike near the Russian border had put them on alert for retaliation. But as radar confirmed the inbound aircraft, it became clear these weren't North Korean planes. They were Soviet MiG-15s, and they were closing in fast. The MiG-15 was a lethal adversary faster, with swept wings and powerful 37mm and 23mm cannons, making it one of the most dangerous jets of the era. By comparison, the F-9 F-5 Panther was well-armed but slower, with a top speed of 600 miles per hour, nearly 100th slower than the MiG. The MiG's superior climb rate of 10,000 feet per minute dwarfed the Panther's 4,900, giving it a distinct advantage in vertical combat. Aboard Oriskany, the tension was palpable. The Navy's doctrine was clear: intercept the enemy before they could strike. No mistakes, no hesitation. Below deck, the carrier roared to life. Engines fired up, and the deck crew moved with precision, racing against time to launch the F-9 F Panthers into the hostile skies. Lieutenant Royce Williams and 3 other VF-781 pilots, his wingman Lieutenant Dave Rowlands, along with Lieutenant Claire Elwood and his wingman Lieutenant John Middleton, scrambled to their aircraft at 1 p.m. Their engines growled to life as they prepared to intercept the threat. They lifted off into the blizzard, their canopies shaking under the turbulence as they climbed toward the enemy. Suddenly, disaster struck. Lieutenant Elwood's voice crackled over the radio. His aircraft had suffered fuel and hydraulic failure. The message was grim. He and his wingmen had to abort. That left only Williams and Middleton to face the Soviet MiG-Zs alone. Directed toward the incoming enemy, Williams and Middleton powered north, their engines roaring as they pushed toward the intercept point. At 12,000 feet, they broke through the thick cloud cover, climbing swiftly towards 16,000 feet. Then, 45 miles from the carrier, Williams spotted them contrails, streaking high above at over 30,000 feet. Soviet MiG. Williams climbed higher, radioing back to Oriskany. Tally-ho, he had visual contact. 7 enemy fighters were in 2 groups, 3 in one formation, 4 in another. Then, as if sensing their presence, the MiG-Zs split apart, diving at full speed, encircling the 2 lone Panthers. His heart pounded as his finger hovered near the trigger. Every instinct told him to fire. But then, a sudden command crackled from the Combat Information Center aboard Oriskany: do not engage. Williams hesitated. The enemy was bearing down on them, but orders were orders. He began adjusting his course, ready to disengage. Then, the MiG-Zs attacked. Their 23mm and 37mm cannons erupted in blinding bursts. Tracers screamed past Williams' Panther, missing by inches. His pulse quickened, and without a second thought, he flipped the switch to arm his own cannons. "We are already engaged," he shouted over the radio. There was no turning back now. This was the first and only direct clash between American and Soviet fighter jets in history. A battle so high stakes, it would be buried from the world for 40 years. Williams would later recall those first fateful moments of engagement. "They came diving at us, and were coming in hot. They fired first, so we knew we were in a fight." As the MiG-15 streaked toward them, Williams and Middleton opened fire. A short burst from their 20mm cannons ripped through the sky, striking one of the Soviet fighters. Smoke erupted from its fuselage as debris flew off, sending the jet spiraling downward. Middleton stayed locked onto the crippled MiG, determined to finish the kill. He lined up his sights, finger poised on the trigger. Then, disaster struck. All 4 of his cannons jammed at once. He frantically tried to clear the malfunction, but it was hopeless. Frustrated, he had no choice but to break off the chase, leaving the enemy jet damaged but still in the fight. With Middleton effectively unarmed, the situation took a dire turn. Williams assessed the odds 6 MiGs against his lone Panther. He gave a decisive order. Middleton was to return to the Oriskany immediately. As his wingman peeled away, Williams tightened his grip on the controls. He was now alone against overwhelming numbers. The MiGs wasted no time. They held every advantage: an 80-knot speed surplus and a far superior climb rate. The Soviet jets zoomed above him, readying for a diving attack. A vertical engagement would be suicide. Williams couldn't outclimb them. Instead, he relied on precise maneuvering. Rolling his Panther into a tight turn, he forced the MiGs to overshoot each time they closed in, denying them a clean shot. The aerial melee intensified. The 6 enemy fighters swarmed around him like vultures, trying to pin him down. His pulse pounded, but his hands remained steady. Then an opportunity. One MiG crossed directly in front of him. Williams reacted instantly, squeezing the trigger. A nearly perfect deflection shot connected, sending cannon rounds tearing through the enemy aircraft. The MiG shuddered, then spiraled uncontrollably. The pilot ejected, his parachute bursting open against the sky. Williams barely had time to process the kill before the remaining 5 MiGs tightened their formation. They closed in from multiple angles, forcing him into a brutal defensive dance. Banking hard, he weaved and rolled, clawing for every sliver of open sky, knowing the odds were stacked against him. Then, out of nowhere, a MiG-15 screamed beneath him before pulling into a steep vertical climb. It cut dangerously close in front of his nose, a fatal mistake. Williams yanked the stick, bringing his sights in line. His finger found the trigger, and his 4 cannons thundered. The MiG exploded in midair, chunks of burning wreckage spinning toward the frozen sea. But the battle was far from over. Another MiG dived straight at him, its cannons blazing. Williams didn't hesitate. He rolled sharply out of his turn and climbed directly into the oncoming attack. The Soviet pilot fired first long-range 23mm and 37mm rounds shrieked past his cockpit. Williams held his course, waiting for the right moment. Then, at point-blank range, he squeezed the trigger. His rounds ripped into the MiG's frame, lighting it up from nose to tail. The Soviet fighter convulsed in midair, black smoke billowing from its shattered fuselage as it spiraled downward, disappearing into the clouds. Then, his guns fell silent. He was out of ammunition. Reality hit him like a cold shock. He was now defenseless, and the enemy knew it. The remaining MiGs hesitated, seemingly realizing his predicament. But then they resumed their attack, determined to finish him. With no way to fight back, Williams had only one option: escape. He pushed his Panther into a steep dive, heading for the safety of the thick cloud cover below. But the Soviets weren't letting him go so easily. Their cannons flared again, and a 37mm shell slammed into the rear of his Panther. The explosion rocked his aircraft, severing his rudder cables and knocking out his hydraulics. His Panther shuddered, control surfaces barely responding. The damage was catastrophic. More rounds ripped through his fuselage. Williams fought to keep control, using erratic pitch maneuvers to throw off their aim. His Panther jolted violently, but he managed to evade their final shots. Then, with one last desperate maneuver, he plunged into the clouds. For a moment he was blind. His instruments flickered erratically. His rudder and flaps were completely useless. He had only partial aileron control, and even that required constant, manual corrections. He burst out of the cloud layer. But a new horror awaited. He was just 400 feet above the frigid sea, his altitude dangerously low. His fuel was nearly gone. Worse, his Panther was barely flyable. Below 170 knots, the aircraft would become uncontrollable. A safe landing seemed impossible. But bailing out wasn't an option either. The near-freezing water would kill him in minutes. Williams later recalled, "Normally, I would have ejected, but with the cold water conditions I wouldn't have lasted long. So I stuck with it and headed back to the task force." Williams' F-9F Panther was barely flying, its controls sluggish and unreliable. Yet, he pushed full throttle, fighting to keep the wrecked aircraft steady as he aimed for USS Oriskany. The carrier was already at general quarters, but the escorting destroyer had no idea of Williams' distress. Spotting an incoming, heavily damaged aircraft, the ship's gun crews reacted instinctively, opening fire. Tracer rounds streaked through the sky, whizzing past his crippled jet. Each burst could have sent him spiraling into the sea. Williams gritted his teeth, straining to maintain control. Then, another Navy pilot urgently radioed in, identifying his aircraft as friendly. The destroyer ceased fire, but the danger was far from over. His jet was barely holding together. And now came the hardest part: landing a Panther that was nearly unflyable. Aboard Oriskany, the captain adjusted course, trying to align the ship with Williams' descent for a straight-in approach. But with high winds and a pitching deck, success was anything but certain. The carrier's deck loomed ahead. Williams gripped the stick tighter, every nerve focused. He later recalled, "I told the carrier I'm going to be landing at about 200 miles per hour, about 95 miles an hour faster than normal. I'm also having control problems and can't line up with the ship. I'm off by about 15 degrees. We also had heavy winds and a pitching deck. It was going to be interesting." The moment of truth arrived. His failing jet screamed toward the deck. Every muscle in his body tensed. Then his arrestor hook caught. The three-wire snapped tight, jerking the aircraft to a halt. He had made it. When the crew inspected his aircraft, the damage was staggering. -263 holes covered the fuselage, most from shrapnel, after the 37mm shell exploded near the engine. His Panther was a wreck, but he had survived. But his mission wasn't over. As soon as he landed, Vice Admiral Robert P. Briscoe gave him strict orders. This battle never happened. The enemy jets were Soviet, and admitting the encounter could provoke a larger conflict. Briscoe also warned that NSA had intercepted Soviet radio transmissions. Leaking this information could jeopardize intelligence operations. For 40 years, Williams' dogfight remained classified. At age 97, he finally told his story, recalling his wife's reaction. "When I finally told my wife," Camilla said, "Oh, Royce." She was very surprised. In January 2023, after decades of silence, Royce Williams was awarded the Navy Cross, the second highest U.S. military honor. His battle, once erased from history, was finally recognized. If you enjoyed this incredible untold story of aerial combat, make sure to subscribe to FLYTOP for more hidden war stories and legendary dogfights. What other classified missions have been buried in history? Stay tuned. March 1945, General Maurice Rose leads the charge into Nazi Germany. Victory is within reach until a German ambush changes everything. In an instant, bullets fly, and the battlefield descends into chaos. But retreat is not an option. The final battle for Hitler's last stronghold has begun. Imagine American soldiers dodging the deadly roar of Panther tanks. From France's shores, they've clawed their way into Nazi Germany, nearing the last industrial bastion propping up Hitler's empire. Just miles from a strike to end it all, can they make it? General Maurice Rose, the bold heart of this charge, suddenly faces a German tank trap. Stepping from his jeep, he's cut down in a flash. His stunned men scatter into the woods as bullets fly. Their march falters, but retreat never. Too much blood's been spilled. They surge forward, guns blazing, tearing into the enemy. Sherman tanks smash through defenses as artillery carves a path for infantry to hit hard. Hitler's last stronghold teeters on the edge. How did they turn chaos into triumph? Stick with us, the fall of the Führer's fortress is just ahead. By 1940, Europe trembled beneath Adolf Hitler's Wehrmacht. 7 nations fell in rapid succession, their armies shattered by the Blitzkrieg. But by 1945, the myth of Nazi invincibility had faded into history. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, the German supreme commander in the West, lamented the crumbling state of his forces, likening his command to playing a Beethoven sonata on an old, rickety, out-of-tune piano. For 3 years, a new force had risen against the Reich, one of the few Hitler had challenged with a formal declaration of war: the United States of America. When American recruits first set foot in Europe, war was an unforgiving teacher. 2/3 had never even held a rifle. But with time, they hardened into battle-tested warriors, storming the beaches of Normandy and pushing deep into Hitler's fortress. Now, their eyes were locked on Berlin. The once mighty Wehrmacht was crumbling, but the road ahead remained treacherous. The Americans knew one truth: the Führer would never surrender without a fight. On March 7, 1945, thousands of American boots roared over the Rhine River's edge. Ten's eyes traced the Ludendorff Bridge's battered pillars would it hold. The Germans had tried blasting it apart, a frantic bid to halt the Allied tide. Smoke swirled, debris fell, yet the bridge stood firm. General Omar Bradley, atop the 12th Army Group, gaped in awe. To his officers he grinned. This will bust him wide open. He barked orders. Troops and tanks raced across before fate could intervene. Luck alone wouldn't win this war, though. Berlin loomed 300 miles off, with the Ruhr, Germany's industrial core, barring the way. Army Group B, led by Field Marshal Walter Model, guarded it fiercely. Dubbed the Führer's firemen for taming hopeless fights, Model's 400,000 troops dug in, primed to drown any advance in blood. Hitler's empire waned, but their steel held firm. Storming the Ruhr head-on? Suicide for weary GIs. Enter Dwight D. Eisenhower, Allied mastermind with a sharper plan, a bold pincer move to choke the Germans out. Success could smash Nazi defiance in the West, clearing the path to Berlin. General Courtney Hodges's First Army would drive east, 90 miles north. William H. Simpson's Ninth Army would pounce. If it worked, they'd trap Model's forces in the Ruhr pocket. But here's the catch: no radio chatter between them. How would they dodge a German ambush? Keep watching, this gambit's about to unfold. After 10 days of relentless strain, the Ludendorff Bridge finally collapsed into the Rhine on March 17th. It had served its purpose, allowing thousands of American troops to flood into enemy territory. But the bridgehead alone was not enough for the grand offensive ahead. The Allies needed a larger, more decisive crossing. Enter Operation Plunder, a multi-pronged assault designed to force the Rhine and open the final path to victory. Led by General William H. Simpson and Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, the operation commenced on the night of March 23rd in a storm of fire and steel. Over 5,000 Allied guns roared in unison, unleashing a devastating barrage that shattered German defenses along the eastern bank. On the ground, Hobart's Funnies, a collection of highly specialized armored vehicles, rolled into action. Churchill tanks, modified for maximum destruction, tore through enemy fortifications. Flame-spewing crocodiles with their 120-yard jets of fire turned Nazi bunkers into infernos. Avraris, launching their massive flying dustbins, obliterated reinforced positions in fiery bursts. German soldiers battle-hardened across